Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the International Cultic Studies Association. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today for the interview with Doug and Wendy Duncan. Um, I do want to mention that this webinar has been extremely popular. When I look back, we've had more registrants for this webinar than any that I can remember or even looking back. So that tells me that the information here is extremely relevant for everyone. And then there's still a large need and interest in healing of spiritual abuse. But also that Doug and Wendy are very popular among our network. I know that Doug and Wendy have been involved with ICSA for a long time. And we at ICSA appreciate that greatly. So I think I have everyone muted, and I ask that you stay muted so that we can proceed with the webinar and the interview without interruption. This is being recorded, so if you do not want your video on or your identity known, please turn your camera off, and you can also change the name on your screen if you want to remain anonymous. I'll be allowing people into the webinar as we go along. Some people will be joining in progress. But let's get started. So here we have Doug and Wendy Duncan. They are from Dallas, Texas. And as I said, they have been contributors and supporters of ICSA for a long time. We'll be highlighting Wendy's book, I Can't Hear God Anymore, Life in a Dallas Cult, which was written, we were just talking about this probably close to 20 years ago. And we'll be talking about that. They're also co-authors of Wounded Faith, which is a book that ICSA published a few years back. And both Doug and Wendy write for ICSA Today magazine with articles and book reviews and so on and so forth. So good morning, Wendy and Doug. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here today. It's always great spending time with you. I guess we could start with just asking, what's your history and background in the cultic studies field, either personally, academically? What got you moving into this field of spiritual abuse recovery?
Go ahead.
Well, we were in a religious pseudo-Christian group, and after we came out, and after we, were trying to figure out what happened to us, what we were involved with. We started reading the cult literature, all the books that we could get our hands on, and we became fascinated with the whole cult phenomena. It was so fascinating and interesting. So that's kind of how we got involved, and it kept growing. And then we went to an ICSA conference and found people that were like us, and we felt more normal. We found people had gone through similar experiences, so we fell into it.
Yeah, yeah. How did your personal experience in the cult that you were in kind of lead you to wanting to get involved with this? And I guess maybe what I'm asking too is, how did you come to realize that the group you were in was cultish and spiritually abusive?
Well, I had always had a few questions about the group because I met my former cult leader when I was only 18 years old and was recruited in by my best friend at the time, who had fallen in ahead of me really hard. And he don't do that. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was at that time, I was going to college in a different city. I lived in Dallas and I was attending university down in Austin. And my cult leader was trying to get me to stop going to school in Austin and just stay in Dallas and be a part of the group. And my mother was very, very upset about that. And she said at the time, this is a cult, or this is a cult-like thing to do. And so you know, the entire time that I was in the group, I had already had that planted in my head that this might be a cult, and of course, you know, you deny that and you don't really think about it, and you pretend that it isn't a cult the whole time you're there. But I mean, there was a part of me that certainly knew that from the outside it looked like a cult. Other people called us a cult, and then you know you would see examples of authoritarian behavior on the part of the leadership, and then you know, of course, I was part of the leadership eventually, so that you know, I participated in some of the authoritarian behavior, but um, you know, but it was not too hard to kind of put the pieces together. Plus, we talked to other members who had left before we did after we got out, and uh, and you know they were all ahead of us in reading the cult literature and putting it together that our group was a cult.
But let me say this, and I say this frequently. You can call it a cult, you can call it a umbrella, you can call it spiritually abusive, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but all of those type of groups have common characteristics. And when after Doug and I got married, we on our honeymoon, we were reading a book called Toxic Faith. And we had not come to the terms that we were in a cult. We were just knew that it was unhealthy. So we were reading a book called Toxic Faith, and in the end, at the back of the book, it has 10 characteristics of a toxic faith system. And so we argued whether or not Trinity Foundation fit 9 of them or 10 of them. So,
Wow.
so we said, regardless of what it was toxic. It was unhealthy.
That's an amazing part of your story, that you were able to, number one, find the book, agree to read it, and then be able to discuss it openly with each other and acknowledge that the group is actually meeting some of these either criteria or points or red flags. What did it feel like to go through that process with each other? Because I know that that can be really scary. I went through that myself when I realized, you know, things about the group I grew up in, and you're like checking off all these boxes that the group is meeting, and it can be stressful, distressing, scary. What was that like for the two of you?
Um, well, for us, fortunately, we were on the same page pretty much, and so I've said a number of times that was very, very helpful to us that we left together, we left at the same time, and we were able to process it together, initially with each other. Uh, you know, we would read things. Uh, when Wendy was reading more than I was about cults at the time because I went back to school, and so I had my assignments to read, but she you know she would come across things in the literature. We'd read you know something by Stephen Hassan or somebody and discuss that, and for a long time we still laugh about it, but you know we would sit there at the dinner table in the evening every night and talk for the whole evening, and you know and then at 10 o'clock it'd be time to get up and do the dishes and go to bed, and we'd been talking for 2 or 3 hours just processing with each other what we had been through.
Well, we didn't know it at the time, and we didn't know how important that was to talk and to process. And fortunately, we had each other who were safe people and who also got it.
Yeah.
Uh, that's what we tell folks that are in our support groups. Find a safe place where you can talk, where you can process it. Find a place where where the people are non-judgmental, that are not critical, and you know, you hopefully find a place that can kind of get it, understand without them saying, "Oh, I would never have joined a cult."
Yeah.
You know those kind of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know those kind of people.
Well, over the years you run into
You
people
do.
and say, "Oh, yeah, I wouldn't stand it. I'm too strong-willed to be in a cult." Well, we had believe me, we had plenty of strong-willed people in our cult.
And we were
That was
fairly strong-willed.
you were.
Yeah, it can make the process so much harder when we do come across people like that. And unfortunately, some of those people are really close to us. And so, it can be difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Let me,
we
yeah.
also have a lot of people say, well, it just makes the point about how important it is to know the scripture. And we knew the scriptures. We had both, been immersed um, in the Bible in various denominations where the Bible was really taught. We knew the Bible. That was not it. That's not how or why we got involved.
Mhm.
Right.
Yes. Let me ask you, how did you end up leaving? What were those circumstances?
Oh yeah, well, Wendy talks about it in her book and kind of explains the whole process, but in brief, um, we'd had a well, the first thing that happened was we dated for almost 7 years, and we needed the group's permission to get married. I mean, I know it's ridiculous because we were both
Mhm.
adults, but
Got
that
their
was never
attention.
forthcoming for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Mostly, I worked for the leader, and he had me under his thumb and at his beck and call for 24 hours a day. And if
Mhm.
I got married, then that would obviously end because I would have other things to attend to. Um, but eventually, it became very very clear that that was not going to happen. That we were never going to be allowed to be married as part of the group.
And we
And
were not children. We were not
no, we
kids.
were not children.
Uh,
We were both in our 40s at that
and
point,
yeah,
and still are 20 years later, 30 years. Uh,
sure.
yeah,
Love it.
but um, but anyway, so there was a big blow up, and then we eloped, and we went off and got married on our own, and that set off
Mhm.
a series of
Cascading.
cascading events that we should have left right then, but I wasn't ready to do that. So we tried to fit back in for another 6 months or so, and then there was another blow up, and then we left.
But it was so clear to me that they were gonna sabotage our marriage. They were
Wow.
gonna do whatever they needed to do to break us up so they could prove themselves right, that we shouldn't.
Yes. To prove themselves right, to continue on with the plan as they had it before with Doug, you being available to them. And yeah, and mostly because of the narcissistic tendencies of most cult leaders
Mhm.
to have to be right.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the thing
But
that
the hallmark of any spiritually abusive or cultic group is that control and that authoritarianism.
Hmm.
Um,
It can be subtle, but it's always there. It's always there, and in our case, it wasn't subtle at all.
mhm.
The leader was a very, very extremely type A, aggressive, narcissistic person. But we've encountered other groups where the leadership is a lot more subtle about it, but it's always there, that authoritarianism.
And I think all of us had this experience of looking back on something that happened in our group and thinking, why in the world did I participate in that? Why in the world did I believe that? Why in the world did I give the right to marry who I wanted to marry over to a man, a group? Why in the world did I do that? Uh, so we all have those questions and question ourselves about why some of these things happened.
Yeah. So that was a lot of the processing that we did, and we came to align very well with what Margaret Singer and Robert Lifton and others have written about the whole idea of thought reform, and we could see it. And you can go down all of Lifton's 8 criteria, and we could see, and looking back at my group, I can certainly see all of those very operative in our group.
Mhm.
one thing that I notice from when I was active in private practice and also with ICSA, but more so when I was active in private practice, is that spiritually abusive groups or cults have a different level of damage, I think, from secular cults, because taking that kind of like innate and inherent need to believe in a higher power and a God and a belief system that is commonplace in the world, whatever religion it is, it's that desire to connect with a higher being. And then the spiritually abusive group takes that and twists that. And and it's such an intrusion, I think, to people's kind of core and their heart, because they want to gain acceptance from their Lord or their God or their spiritual belief system. And it can have people, and I've seen this in my private practice, running in circles trying to make sure that they are acceptable to God, but it's just an exploitation of that desire to be close to God. So it's so much different than a secular cult. And how did you experience that process of wanting to be acceptable to God, wanting to worship, wanting to have religion and spirituality in your life, and then have that core need and desire of yours twisted?
Yeah. Well, one thing in our group, they did a process with people called the hot seats, and they actually called them the hot seats, and that's what they were. Uh, and the leader was able to convince people, when you were on the hot seat and all of your sins were being confessed, and everybody was telling you what a miserable sinner you are and how bad you are. He could get you to the point where you truly, truly believed that that you were doomed to eternal damnation, that was your fate, and that was what was going to happen to you. And that's the most psychological pressure I think you can put somebody under. I mean, this is worse than just telling somebody you're going to kill them. I mean, it's worse, because if you're a believer, you can believe, gosh, I may die, but after this, I'll go to heaven and be with God.
Yeah.
But if you can truly convince somebody, and he was able to do that, truly convince somebody that you are eternally damned, and that's your eternity is going to be out in the Gehenna. That's enormously frightening, damaging, and hurtful and traumatic. And so there's a lot of healing that has to be done from that.
And I think all cultic, spiritually abusive, or just abusive groups want to destroy your sense of self, your ego, put all kinds of what we call cult phobias, cult-induced phobias. But it seems like they all do that because they want to destroy your sense of self, your self-esteem, so that you're more malleable, you're more controllable.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So let's talk about your book for a few minutes, Wendy. What led you to write the book?
Well, after we came out of our group, that was probably the worst time in my whole life, because I think you mentioned something about the losses that you go through, the loss of structure, the loss of relationships, friendships, family, because they taught this is your real family. Family, all of those losses. So you're in a deep process of grief. You're in a deep process of trying to figure out, what happened, and, who are you now? Who are you now? You've lost your sense of purpose. You've lost your sense of mission. So I ended up going to a therapist, and at one point she said, Wendy, maybe you ought to write a book about your experience. And so I nodded politely and I said, oh, yeah. Well, I thought that was preposterous. I thought that was a preposterous idea. I wasn't a writer. I didn't know anything about writing. A couple of months later, one of my sisters said, Wendy, maybe you should write a book about your experience. And I thought, And then a couple of months after that, a friend of ours who had been in the cult with us and had left several months before us was rushed to the hospital. She had a brain aneurysm. And a couple of days later, she died. She was only like 40. She died. And I was going back through, had talked a lot after we came out of the cult. We talked a lot about our experience. And I went back through the emails that we had written to each other. And in one of the emails, she said, Wendy, maybe you should write a book, not of anger, but of enlightenment. Because maybe there's other people out there that can be helped from your experience. And then I thought, I guess I got to write a book. I mean, it was three times I was told that. I thought, okay, well, I guess I got to write a book. So that's how that started.
Yeah.
Mhm. What do you like about your book the most in terms of how you think it can help other people? And I guess what was your original purpose in writing it too? Like, how did you see it? Was it a therapeutic process for yourself? Did you have intention that it would be so helpful to people out here? Because Amazon has like rave reviews of it, so it's clearly helping people. And I wonder if that was part of your purpose at the time, or if that all just kind of came about afterward.
Yeah, it was just a process. And to be honest with you, I don't really like the book.
Why do you say that?
Well,
I wasn't expecting that.
at one point, I told Doug,
Other people really do.
A lot of people like the book.
A lot of people really do.
that I had to tell my horrible, miserable, no good story. And I don't like that. I mean, I laid it all out there, what a horrible person I was. And so, I mean, that's embarrassing.
I think if I can say something, I think speaking, in consideration of all the feedback and we've gotten, I think that's part of what makes the book good is that Wendy was willing to be really, really honest, and she wasn't trying to make herself look good or anything. She was just being as honest as she could. And I think that I think part of the thing with writing the book was that she was processing the experience and trying to figure out. So writing the book was part of her process.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it was absolutely therapeutic. And we
Yeah.
recommend to people, right. It's so therapeutic. Journal, you know. You don't have to
Tell your story. Yeah.
tell your story, just process it. And yeah, so I went through the whole thing, and I even at one point researched our cult leader because he had told us all these amazing things about himself. He had been in the um, with the Defense Department, and he had been in the Air Force, and he had been in politics, and he had been in the oil business and had made millions of dollars, which he gave up for us, of course. He told all of these stories. Well, after I started researching it, it was a bunch of lies.
Oh, wow.
Okay, maybe there was a little bit of truth, but man, it was embellished. And so, I mean, that was just part of the process, but it was interesting because I wasn't working at the time. And so I would be researching or doing whatever during the day. And I interviewed over 36 people, former members of the group.
Wow.
For
Of the group you came out of.
Yes.
Yeah, former members of our group.
Yes.
And anyway, so when Doug would come home from work, I would share with him what the latest part I found, and he was just devastated.
Yeah.
He couldn't believe it.
It was when she started the part of the book where she was researching our leader's background, initially I told her, don't waste your time. Yeah, he did all that. That's not what's relevant in the story here. But as she uncovered more and more and more, it turned out that yeah, in fact, he had lied and certainly, and yeah, there was always maybe a little nugget that he was expanding, but he had greatly embellished his life story to the
Tell
point.
about the joy of your. Tell about when you stopped and got that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, at one time, I just in that process, when she was finding out all that stuff, I remember one time I had to stop on my way home from work, and pick up the CD of the Jefferson Airplane so I could come home and listen to that song where it says, "When the truth is found to be lies," and
Mm.
I just remember listening to that song over
And
and
all the
over.
joy within you
I
dies.
know. Yeah, it was devastating. Even after, this was 3 or 4, 5 years after we'd been out of the cult. Uh, but, I still had believed a lot of his story. I just, you know, it was, yeah, it was a troubling thing to go through to realize that I had just been so taken in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, and to learn that things that you really believed about a person and respected about them,
Right.
and those are the things that drew you in and had you, kind of be willing to give your loyalty and be willing to give your time, that none of it was true, or most of it was not true. Yeah, really, really devastating. It feels so exploitive. I've experienced that too, and it truly, truly is very distressing.
It is.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So there's a lot to be processed. Looking at my interview questions here. Is there anything more you want to say about the book before we get into the current work that you guys are doing now?
Well, let me say one thing because,
Yeah.
consistently the feedback that we get from other people, and especially maybe people who have not necessarily been in cults themselves, is that they read the book and they say, "Oh yeah, I get it. I get how, you found a place that looked like, you had true community, and at first there was an appeal there. I understand how you could have gotten drawn in." So I think she did a real good job in explaining
Mhm.
and making it easy to understand how a person could get sucked into a group like
Mhm.
that.
'Cause
Yeah.
I, for one, was looking for a community. I didn't call it community, but I was looking for a place to belong and to be accepted.
Mhm.
And I had, grew up as a Southern Baptist and divorced, and that's in the Baptist denomination. Divorces, you're looked on kind of like a second class citizen. No one ever says that, but that was the message that I got and that I carried with me, that I was less than all the other Christians. I was not as good as them. So when I stumbled into the Trinity Foundation, they think I'm too religious. They think
Mm.
I'm too good. And I was like, whoa. So it was a place where I felt I was okay, I was accepted, I wasn't judged, and that was powerful.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But,
Um,
the other thing I wanted to say was, I think for all of us, when we come out of a group, we wonder, "Why did God let us get involved in something like this?" We were only trying to learn more about Him. "Why did God allow this to happen?" "Why did the cult leader do this?" Why we had a lot of why questions. And at some point, we realized that the why questions have to turn into how. How can I get through this experience? How can I get through this pain? How do I get through this so that I can not be stuck in bitterness or resentment or anger, but I can somehow use this experience, um, and be a better person or help other people. We have to get into the how.
I love that. I have to say that's one of the most profound things I've heard about the cult recovery process so far is that right there, moving from the why to the how. And I'm sitting here and listening to that, and it's really hitting me personally as a former cult person, as a mental health professional. And then I'm reminded that both of you are mental health professionals as well. And so I'm not surprised that something so wise and profound, is there for you to share with everyone. Um, and I hope that that kind of concept is as meaningful to our audience and other people as it has been to me just now. So I thank you for that. Um, That's a good segue into your support group. So I guess quickly, how did you decide to start your support group? I know it's been going on for 15 years or more. That's a significant piece of work and dedication to a population who has struggled with spiritual abuse. So, what do you have to say to our audience about maybe why you started it, or and then I'd really like to get into what you value about the work you're doing, and give the audience some understanding about how your support groups work.
Yeah. Um,
I know that's like 5 questions in one. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I have a
Well,
bad habit of doing that.
yeah, no, that's fine. Just as far as starting the support group, I think we'd gotten to a point. We left in 2000. It was around 2007. We started the support group. So we'd already we'd done a lot of the reading. We'd read the book. We'd been to therapy. I'd gone back to school. I had become a counselor, um, and uh, and I think at that point it did feel like we're ready to give back and to help other people. And Wendy had written her book at that point, and so we had I think we had done some of the work and had gotten to where we were ready to share what we had learned with other people.
Not that we had totally recovered,
Oh
but
yeah, no, I'm not
yeah.
sure that we're totally recovered now. I mean, it's always an ongoing process of growth and recovery, but but we wanted to make a place for other people to be able to share their story and to talk, and maybe people that didn't come out together with their spouse, and had all the opportunities to process that we did. So we wanted to start a place where people could talk about it with other people who would not judge them,
Mm,
and that's what it's been.
mm,
And we self-consciously tried to kind of model it on what Bill and Lorna Goldberg were doing with their support group. And we didn't charge anything, and still don't. I mean, it's just a thing for where people can come. um
No commitment, no agreement to come every time. In fact, most of the people that come over the years may come 2 or 3 times, and then they may not come for 5 times, and then 5 months, and then they come back. We've even had people, um, who I've talked with on the phone, and they pour out their heart. They pour out their heart, and I say, "I'm gonna put you on the list, the email list, send out the meeting information every month, and you come when you can." I've had people not come for a year or 2.
mm.
So, people come when they come, and it's just interesting process.
the yeah for a long time we'd have a lot of people, a number of people from the International Churches of Christ contact us, and they would talk to us on the phone, but they would never show up to
Yeah.
the support group. I think we've had one or two eventually show up, but it's just interesting to see how tentative people are. And over the years, gosh, we've had there were lots of former JWs. Just about any group you can think of. We've had former members. We've had several former Children of God, the family people, and it's been a fascinating process, because even though I still maintain and absolutely say our former group was a cult with a capital C. uh, you you do encounter people whose experiences were oftentimes even more destructive than
Yeah.
what you went through, with especially like with former members of groups like the Children of God, where there was a lot of sexual abuse, and it's just horrific things.
We have heard some horrific stories, but what we always think to ourselves and say to ourselves is, "These are some of the most interesting, creative, intelligent people that
Mhm.
we've ever met." I mean, it's a blessing for us. Just
Yeah, just
But we start let me just say this, we started the groups, and we didn't know what we were doing, but we started it and we showed up. Every month we showed up, and people came and went, and that was kind of the process. And we met in person until, and by the way, it was a secular, it was not a religious, it was not a Bible study, it was not a Christian support group. It was just a support group. And until the pandemic, we met in person. And then when the pandemic hit, we started doing the virtual online groups.
Yeah, so we meet by Zoom, which has been an interesting process because we've had people from all over, from literally all over the country, and sometimes from even outside the country who have showed up. So you get to do that on the Zoom. You miss a little of the face to face, but we've met a lot of nice people from different states and different places.
Yeah, you made a great point that that your support group, and I think it's important for people to understand this, that it's not a Christian support group and it's not a Bible study. The fact that a spiritually abusive group meets the same criteria as a secular cult
Yes.
allows the two of you to be able to understand people who come from any type of cultic or controlling or coercive background. And and so
Yeah,
for
the focus is on the thought reform. Honestly, I mean, Margaret Singer, Robert Lifton, that kind of approach, and that's universally applies. I mean, it could be a nominally evangelical Christian group, or it could be Scientology, or it could be anything. You've got essentially the same process going on.
But what's also interesting is I think every single person, this last support group we had, someone from Twin Flames. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
Twin Flames came, and she's just so full of shame, and how could I have gotten involved in something like this? And I think most people say that initially. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have been so dumb? What was there about me? What was wrong with me that I got involved in this? And what we tell them, there wasn't anything wrong with you. You are intelligent, you are smart, you are creative. That was not why you got involved. And people helping people understand it wasn't they were bad, they were wrong, but they just stumbled into something that was bad, that was wrong. They just happened upon a person that exploited their needs and their.
At a time when they were vulnerable, they ran into a determined persuader, and that could happen to anybody unless you're a psychopath, in which case you're not vulnerable. But but any normal human being has times of vulnerability. I met my cult leader when I was 18. I was trying to go through that transition and grow up, and
Yeah. I think the bonus for people who find you is that, yes, you of course know and have studied and have experienced thought reform and, focus the group on that. But for people who have gone through this added kind of trauma of spiritual abuse, you understand that as well. And you can help people with that, because that can be a piece that a cult recovery therapist who has not experienced that, or who is not religious in any way, it can be difficult to kind of help a client with that. And I speak from a personal perspective. It can be really difficult to take care of that need for someone if you aren't professionally and personally prepared for that. So that's an added bonus for the people who find you. One question that the two of you and I were talking about before we started the Zoom was, how do you work with those types of people who come to you? How do you reassure people who are so confused about God, who are so confused about they have, a need to be spiritual or religious or connect with God, but it's either too frightening or that they feel so disconnected. I've had clients like that. And how do you, we were saying, my question that I was going to ask was, how do you reassure people that they can do that? And that might not be the best worded question, but how do you work with people who are struggling with that?
And let me just back up a little bit. After we came out of our cult, we struggled really, really hard to reconnect with God.
Mm.
The God that was portrayed in our cult was a God that was harsh and punitive and angry. And our cult leader actually taught God hates you as an individual. He only loves you as a part of the body, as part of the bride of Christ. But as an individual, he hates you. And so even though, I didn't believe that when I first came in, over the years through that thought reform, I began to believe that God hates me and that he was mean and angry and harsh. But when we got out, I wanted to reconnect with him because I had such a powerful experience when I was in my last semester of college. I had one of those powerful experiences with God. And so I remembered that. And so when I got out of the cult, I would be like, God, I'd be praying the best I could. Be like, God, I want to have a relationship with you again, but I don't really like you. I don't like you. And so I had to really work on figuring out who God was, figuring out that the God that they had portrayed in the cult was not really God. That was the cult God. That wasn't the real God. So it took a long time to work through all that. And then we started the support group, and we eventually stumbled into a church, and I reconnected with God, and we did that. Then we started the support group, or that was in the process, but it wasn't religious at all. We didn't talk about getting your relationship back with God. But at some point, that began to weigh heavy on me, and I'd say to Doug, I'm not getting any younger, and that's my heart's desires, for people to be able to reconnect with God. So how do we do that? So I ended up writing a proposal. It was called the Wounded Sheep Project. It was a proposal for churches, a call to churches to reach out to those people that are estranged from God, that have left the faith, that have been hurt, that have been spiritually abused, and reach out to them, and and help them to find their way back to God. So we wrote that, and then eventually, there's a whole proposal about how we can do that. But we started something called the Wounded Sheep Support Group last summer, and it's specifically for people who want to try to get their relationship back with God. They're not antagonistic toward God. They may not know really what they want, but they are not they have a little bit of openness toward God. And so we started that group, and it's that's been an amazing process.
Yeah, so we started a second group. So the original group continues, and it continues just like it was, and it's secular and it's open and it's non-religious. It's just about people from whatever kind of group being able to talk in a non-judgmental space. And we have started the second group, which we actually do at our church, for people who are open to try to get that relationship with God back. And it's that's been an interesting process as well. But it's two different things that we're doing.
And another interesting thing about the group of people that are involved in that support group is none of them are involved in a church.
Oh,
yeah, none of them. We had one guy tell me, say that he and his wife had tried to go to a church, and so they were trying. They were starting to think about that idea, but
yeah.
that they're not people that are currently involved in the church.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but they're open to talking about God and thinking about, is there a path back
Mhm.
for me? So
So you said ask how we reassure them. I think just by giving people the hope that they can. It may take a long time, but they can reconnect with God. They can, uh, process their image of God and come to a healthy view of who God is. It is possible. It may take a long time. It's maybe very painful, but they can do it.
yeah, I think that is a big part of the thing is, emphasizing that, you're allowed to take the time that it takes. It takes whatever it takes,
Hmm.
just,
Yeah.
but if you will address yourself to the, to the issue,
Mhm.
then you can make progress.
Yeah.
And God is not sitting there thinking, what is wrong with this person? Why are they taking so long? God is not judging us. God is so patient with us.
Yeah.
It's wonderful because, the sense of loss when you want to reconnect with God, when that's been taken from you, when that's someone that you've always been, um, and then you just have all of this emotional and mental and psychological damage that's preventing you from reaching out and kind of grabbing that relationship that you need with God. The sense of loss is
Mm.
palpable. I mean, it's hard to explain. I think a lot of people don't get it. It's like, well, if you love God and you want to be religious, then just do it, just be it. And, just like with any other thought reform process, it's so hard sometimes for people who have not experienced it to understand that there are psychological and mental and emotional barriers that really are stronger than brick walls sometimes. Um,
Um,
yeah. And
Good point. That's an excellent point.
But also I would say this, and I think sometimes people who are kind of oriented more in a secular direction, um, are underappreciate the depth of yearning that people have, and I mean, that's a human thing. I mean, every culture in the history of the world has been religious in some way or another. I mean,
Spiritual.
or it's spiritual, and so, I mean, so that's some important piece of our humanity, and when that's frustrated or damaged or thwarted in some way, people feel that as a loss.
Mm, that's such a great point. And I think it's important for just like the general public to always be reminded of that and to acknowledge that. I mean, even in my undergraduate, studies in anthropology classes, you learn like the history of humankind has always included this need or piece of spirituality, in their communities and societies and in their cultures. And I think for people who can't relate to that, it can sometimes be like, well, what do you really need that for? And, just kind of move on. And um, it's great that people who have this unique experience of having that yearning, like you said, Doug, and needing to repair that and needing to get back to that, have people like you and have the two of you out there to say, we get all of it. We get the thought reform. We get the yearning for the spiritual need. We understand that it needs to be repaired. We understand that it's going to take time and there's no timeline. Wendy, that was a great point about God doesn't have you on a timeline to repair this. And that there's no judgment. It's such a wonderful opportunity for people. And so I, am just on behalf of, people, I guess, just so grateful that the two of you are out there and willing to do this and are doing it, especially for so long. It really is a dedication. We have about 10 minutes. I'm not sure if there's anything more you want to say in terms of interview, or if you'd like to take a couple of questions. We can, people can write questions in the chat and I can read them if you like.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. We're taking questions.
Okay, let me see if I can find the chat. Not, not the chat. Okay. Yeah, I'm not the most savvy with technologies, but we're making it work today here. Let's see.
So
Let's
while
see.
you're looking, let me just say this,
Yeah,
Jackie.
please. Yeah.
ICSA has been very important in our recovery. And we've gone to a lot of the conferences, and there are so many people from Bible-based religious cults that have gone to ICSA and have been helped. And so, I think that ICSA is not only available for people that have been in non-religious cults,
Hmm.
but it's also available for people that have been in Bible-based cults. So it has a huge resource library, and it's the largest organization, the largest cult awareness organization.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And part of my, kind of personal strategic plan in terms of being, appointed in this role, which I'm so humbled because that's kind of what led me to my recovery, was discovering ICSA out of the blue one day a number of years ago, as I was struggling to get out of the group that I grew up in. All of a sudden, you do an internet search and ICSA pops up on the Google search and you're like, what? Like there's an entire organization that deals with this. Um, so I mean, I've personally been assisted so much by learning about these things, thought reform, ICSA's existence, and part of my goal, um, because of getting to know you guys, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, and getting to know other people who are really like doing the work in the spiritually abusive field, the Garrett's, there's so many, but is to really, move ICSA toward a place where, we can highlight the needs for spiritual abuse more, like as we continue reorganizing, as we continue to, kind of modernize our systems and so on and so forth, is, how do we kind of bring the spiritual abuse need, highlighted under ICSA, where I know before maybe it was kind of its own entity, aside from ICSA, when it had its own website and that. But I really want to make sure that under ICSA, the whole need of spiritual abuse recovery is right out there in front with everything. So that's, part of our strategic plan. And I appreciate you mentioning that ICSA has helped you, because it has for me too, or wouldn't have even taken this position. But so let's see if there's a couple of questions here. One that I just happened upon was, is your group comprised of survivors who still retain their faith and survivors who have left their Christian faith beliefs? If so, how do you negotiate group meetings with both groups in attendance?
But is that about the support group, the support group we've been doing for however 15 years or more? The secular group, yeah, there's everybody in there. There are people who are still believers. There are people who are non-believers or have never been believers, or yeah, it's just a hodgepodge of humanity in there. That's fine. Everybody's welcome. I don't know that there's anything to negotiate except for, we don't. One of the norms of the group explicitly is that nobody is there to proselytize. Nobody is there to voice their own beliefs on anybody else. You can talk about something in a way like what's helped you, but not to tell somebody else what they ought to do or believe.
And respect. We emphasize respect everybody where they are in their journey, respect where they are currently. That cannot be understated.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Here's another one. Um, I think the biggest thing for me in terms of leaving a religious cult was reclaiming my instinctive critical thinking. How do you
Mhm.
help folks deal with that in your Wounded Sheep group?
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that it just I don't know that that specific topic has come up a lot in the Wounded Sheep group, but I am big on critical thinking. Absolutely. You want to be able to exercise your reason 100%. That's something that was impeded and taken away from you in cultic groups. Cults don't encourage you to reason and to think for yourself. We'll tell you what to think,
Mhm.
but but yeah, that's part of healing is being able to recover your ability to think critically.
Mhm. So we encourage people to ask questions.
Yes.
Yeah, because that opens up those critical thinking skills when you start asking questions and hearing different uh, responses and thinking for yourself, beginning to think for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another question came up is what are the main red flags that identify if a group is being spiritually abusive?
Ooh,
That's a
wow.
good
That's a
question.
good one.
Mhm.
Uh, well, uh, one of them would be exactly what we just said about not encouraging you to think for yourself. That that it, if a group is too quick to have all the answers, if there's and if there's not any variety, if there's not any diversity in viewpoints, that would be a red flag. If everybody is just a monoculture and everybody thinks the same and has the same opinion about everything. When Wendy and I were uh, looking for a church after we left our cultic group, and we were looking around and still visiting around. One time we went to a little church where the pastor had on a Hawaiian shirt, and all of the men in the group had on Hawaiian shirts, and we thought, "Oh no, oh no, we're
What up with that?
no, that red flag right there."
Yeah. It
So
wasn't Hawaiian Sunday or anything.
no, what we weren't in Hawaii, and so no, that was a big red flag. It's like everybody was trying to dress like the pastor. Uh, that yeah, we didn't go for that at all. So that
But also the another red flag would be the control that leadership has, or the authority that they exercise. People should be allowed to be themselves and to have their make their own decisions. And sure, have some guidance maybe, but nobody should tell you what to do with your life. And so
Mhm.
that's a huge. They also,
yeah, you don't want them to go past preaching into meddling, to
yeah,
to quote an old Baptist saying.
and anytime they make you feel bad about who you are, that's a red flag.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and maybe one last question we have, because I was curious about this question when I read it, is let me see if I can get it right. I think it was what has surprised you? Yeah, what has surprised you the most about running the support groups?
Oh, that's
That's a good
interesting.
question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I one thing that continues to surprise me, and it's not just from running the support groups, but just how much of this kind of suffering that there is in the world. There
Mhm.
are so many people out there, um, and I maybe this was a little bit different, but we've spoken at a lot of churches and have spoken at Sunday school classes and
Oh,
different things, and everywhere we go, every time we speak at a Methodist church or a Presbyterian church or any place we've gone, uh, people come up to us after we talk, and there are always people in the audience that have a story of spiritual abuse, and so that wasn't exactly an
Mhm.
answer to your question, but I mean, just there are always people calling us, always new people coming
The
in.
prevalence of it.
Yeah, just the prevalence of it, how much there is.
What surprises me is just when we think we've heard it all, we hear another horrendous story.
Yeah.
And your first inclination is to think, now, how did you get involved in that? But then you get it, you understand. Normal, intelligent people can get involved in these crazy things because they're vulnerable, because they have a need at that particular time in their life to belong, or to be accepted.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've had allergies. I had something else to say, but I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, about probably 15 years ago, a lady called and said that her husband was in an internet cult. And I thought to myself, internet cult? What the heck? How in the heck do you do that? How do you have a cult in the internet? Well, I'm telling you what, they are all over now, those internet cults. They are. Yeah.
Yeah, and the pandemic has made that one worse. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of internet cults out there, and of course, the problem is, they got a lot of reach all over.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's something we're seeing a lot.
So true, isn't it true that such a great point? Whenever you think you've seen it all, like a most
Mhm.
extreme case, inevitably something else comes along, and you never stop being shocked. And I don't mean in a sensationalist way, but in a really sobering kind of way. I know even with me, when I'll hear about cases, and I still get people reaching out, even though I'm not actively in practice anymore, and sometimes it just stays with you for days and days hearing what someone has gone through, and you think, oh my goodness, like I just never could have imagined waking up this morning and learning about this person's story and how horrendous. And it just always keeps you kind of humble and kind of sobered, for lack of a better word. And really, I think for those of us working in this field, it's one of the things that keeps us going, because it can be so draining to do this kind of work sometimes, but it keeps you going because you're always getting these reminders of people out there who yesterday you didn't even know they existed, and today you're aware of how much suffering they've gone through and how much they're going through right now. So I'm so grateful that we're all part of a network that pays attention to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have been very fortunate. We have a group of friends who let us process. We don't tell specific stories or give names or anything like that, but they've been very supportive, and they let us process, and they pray, and they've been very, very helpful in helping us to maintain our
Equilibrium.
Yeah.
To the degree that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that an important point too? I mean, it kind of goes to what we know as mental health professionals and those in the counseling field of, having supervision and processing what you do. But, you know, uh, the reality behind that concept is so important, because you're really, I mean, in the whole concept of vicarious trauma and learning about people's abuse and being in it with them and going through it with them can really, really just be heavy sometimes,
Mhm.
There's sometimes that we are reeling for days
Yeah,
after support group, because there's just the stories that you hear, and the brokenness that people are experiencing. It's just, it's just,
It breaks your heart.
yeah,
Yeah.
it breaks your heart.
yeah. And it helps to have people who are there and who can handle processing that with you, so that like we're not spilling that burden onto people who can't handle it. So I'm so thankful that you guys have people who you can process that with, because you have a lot of years of stories built up in your minds and in your own experiences, from helping people. It's 15 years is a lot of stories and a lot of clients. So yeah. But we're kind of at an hour, and I just want to thank you both so much. I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know both of you, and I'm just grateful that you're in our network with ICSA and that you're out there doing this work. And we have information for people who want information about Doug and Wendy or their support group. You can reach out directly to them or to us at ICSA. There was a lot of information in the promotion of this webinar about how you can contact the Duncans and learn more about their Wounded Sheep support group and Wendy's book. So I just want to thank you both for spending part of your Saturday with us and for being available for so many people.
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you for having us. We've enjoyed it too.
I just have another tiny piece.
Of course.
The groups are closed. You just can't pop in without having been screened first. So we do try to make it as safe as possible.
Good.
So
Yeah,
I just wanted to mention that.
yeah, we make sure we screen people before we let them in. We don't want a current cult member in there, and it's all kinds of downsides to that.
So if you are interested, you can email us and we can talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Oh, Doug and Wendy Duncan, thank you so much. I'm so just thankful that I could spend part of my day with you today.
Thanks,
Thank
Jackie.
you so much.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody.